The wind in that high country did not ask permission. It simply arrived. A sudden cold breath tasting of iron rock and distance. It scraped the edges of the red mesas, carving them finer, and sent spirals of rust-colored dust dancing over the hard pan. Down below, where the cold river cut a green scar through the stone, the town of Dry Willow braced itself. Tunat Ani stood still, letting the wind test him. He was a man made of the same elements as the land around him, his skin weathered to the color of the canyons, his eyes holding the quiet of the far-off peaks. He had seen perhaps 30 winters, but the count was kept in his memory, not on his face, which held in stillness that baffled the white men he sometimes scouted for. He was on the eastern ridge, looking down. The wind carried the thin, high wail of a flute, but there was no musician. It was only the air, forced through a series of holes drilled by time into a standing monolith of sandstone. The people, the Dine, said it was the land warning itself. To listened. The harmony was broken. The balance was wrong. His gaze tracked the valley. Dry Willow was a mistake, wedged between the mountains and the river, built too fast by men who did not understand the water. In spring, the river tried to reclaim the muddy main street. In winter, the wind owned it. It was a place of desperation, not settlement. He had lost his own family not far from here. 10 winters gone. Not to the cavalry, though they were a shadow that always fell from the east, but to the coughing sickness the white men brought, a sickness that left no room for ceremony. Only grief, his wife, his small son, the ho, the harmony of his life, had been shattered. He spent every day since trying to piece it back together, living by the principles of balance in a world that had none. His eyes scanned the ground near his feet. The tracks were a day old. Horseshoe prints sharp in the dirt that had frozen overnight. The frost clinging to their edges told him the horse was shod in the new style, the kind the mining company favored. Heavy, deep, uncaring. He adjusted the bow slung across his back. He carried a rifle, too, a good Winchester, but he trusted the silence of the bow. He turned his pony, a sturdy gray that seemed to half doze in the wind, and began the slow descent toward the town. He did not want to go, but the feeling of imbalance was a hook, pulling him in. Dry Willow was awake and angry. The town was really just one street of raw lumber buildings, a saloon at one end and a hopeful, empty church at the other. The livery stable, the general store, and the marshal's office were squeezed in between. The air smelled of wood smoke, cheap whiskey, and fear. It was a town of transients, miners with hands raw from the rock, hoping for a strike that would never come. Dispossessed settlers who had lost their farms further east and came west only to find the land already claimed by harder men. Ranchers whose cattle kicked up the dust, their crews spending their pay in the saloon before the dust even settled. And everywhere, the quiet, watchful presence of the Dine. His people, moving on the edges, trading wool and turquoise for the flour and coffee they had been forced to need. The tension, today, was coming from the Red Dog Saloon. Even at this early hour, the bat-wing doors swung open, spilling yellow light and loud voices, to dismount it near the trough. Giving his pony a quiet word, he did not tie the reins. The pony would stay. He moved not like a shadow, but like a man who belonged to the ground he walked on, his moccasins making no sound. He stood near the general store, in the shade of the overhang, watching. The antagonists were easy to spot. Barrett Kane's men. Kane was the invisible hand that squeezed Dry Willow. He worked for the New Century Mining Corporation, a name that sounded grand and inevitable. And he was there to clear the way for the railroad and the strip mines. His men were not miners. They were gunmen, wearing new Colts low on their hips and expressions of bored superiority. 3 of them were on the saloon porch, laughing too loud. Their leader, a man with a thick neck and a face like raw meat, spat a stream of tobacco juice into the street. It missed Toe's boot by inches. The man did not notice him. To men like that, to was part of the landscape, like the rocks or the dust, until he became a problem. Then the problem. Marshal Locke stepped out of his own office. Marshal Locke was a man who represented the territorial authority, which meant he represented the men who paid the most. He was tall, with a sweeping mustache that had been fashionable 10 years prior, and his badge was polished. But his eyes were weak, constantly shifting, looking for the path of least resistance. Right now, that path led him straight to Kane's men. "Morning, Marshal," the thick-necked man said, not moving from his slouch. "Barrett's boys," Locke said, forcing a smile that did not touch his eyes. He tipped his hat. "Quiet morning." "Too quiet," the man answered. "We're waiting on news. This whole damn valley is waiting on news." To know what news? The Hart property. A wide stretch of land up by Miller Creek, the only piece that blocked Kane's access to the western slopes. The talk was that old Robert Hart, a man who lived back east in a brick house, was finally selling, or being made to sell. The law in this territory was a fickle thing. It bent toward money. A bill passed 200 miles away in the capital could turn a treaty into a suggestion, and a land grant into an obstacle. The New Century Mining Corporation had the money. The settlers had the grit. The Dine had the memory. It was a volatile mix. The prejudice was as plain as the boardwalk. A rancher, his face burned dark by the sun, watched Kane's men with narrowed eyes. A shopkeeper wrung his hands, knowing that if the mines came, the town would boom, but it would be Kane's town, not his. Women, what few there were in Dry Willow, walked on the far side of the street, their bonnets dipped low. They knew the difference between a man who worked the land and a man who broke it. To felt the familiar ache of his old loss. This was the world that had swallowed his family, a world of paper laws and brute force, where balance was a sign of weakness. He turned his attention back to the marshal. Locke was trying to look official, but he looked like a man trapped. "Just see that you boys keep the peace," Locke said, his voice a little too high. "We do not want any trouble." "We are not trouble, Marshal," the gunman grinned, showing yellow teeth. "We are progress, and progress always gets what it wants." The gunman's eyes swept the street and, for the first time, settled onto. The grin vanished, replaced by a cold assessment. He looked at Toe's rifle, at his pony, at the knife on his hip. He saw a man, not landscape. "What do you want, Injun?" the man snapped. Two did not move. He met the man's gaze. He held the stillness. He said nothing. The air between them crackled. The street went quiet. Marshal Locke cleared his throat. Now. No need for that. Two is just. He is around. He is a scout. Helps the army sometimes." "I do not help the army," To said. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the wind. "The army finds its own way." The gunman's hand twitched, moving near his hip. Two did not blink. He was calculating the distance, the angle of the sun, the way the man's jacket bunched at his shoulder. "Leave him be, Pike," one of the other men said, stepping out. He was younger, but his eyes were just as hard. "Kane wants the land, not a war with the locals." "Not yet." Pike spat again, but he relaxed his hand. "Suit yourself. I'm going back inside. This wind cuts right through you." He pushed back through the saloon doors. Marshal Locke let out a shaky breath and wiped his forehead. Though the morning was cold, he looked at Toe, his expression a mix of relief and resentment. "You should move on." "To," the marshal said, trying to sound firm. "We have official business pending. Sensitive." To look past him, up at the red rocks, where the wind still sang its high, lonely song. He was thinking of freedom, of what it meant to choose your own path. He thought of the families, the ones like his, who were ground between the paper laws of the East and the raw greed of the West. He thought of healing, and how it could not happen on broken land. He gave the marshal a long, unreadable look, then turned, stepped up to his pony, and swung himself into the saddle in one smooth motion. He rode out of Dry Willow the way he had come, the feeling of imbalance stronger than ever. Miles away, and getting closer. Evelyn Hart was tasting that same dust. She was huddled in the back of a rattling freight wagon, hidden under a pile of filthy canvas tarps. She was cold, she was terrified, and she was running for her life. Evelyn was a young woman, barely 21, but she felt ancient. She was small, with fine, light brown hair that was plastered to her face with sweat and dirt, and eyes the color of the sky before a storm. She was also, in this moment, a thief. In the small, worn leather satchel clutched to her chest was her father's signature, and under it, the signature of Barrett Kane. It was a marriage contract, thin and brittle, but it was also a land deed. It promised her, Evelyn Hart, to a man she had never met, one of Kane's business partners, in exchange for mineral rights and consideration on the Miller Creek property. She had been a teacher. She loved books, the weight of them, the smell of the paper, the idea that words could build worlds. She had believed in words, but this contract had shown her that words could also be chains. Her father, Robert Hart, a man whose heart had turned to ledgers, had signed it. He had signed her away. When she refused, when she had locked her door, he had told her it was done. The papers were filed. The deal was made. So she had taken the papers from his desk. Not just the contract, but the other one. The one she did not fully understand. A small, hand-bound notebook filled with maps. They were not maps of the land, but of what was under it. Aquifers, subterranean streams, a web of water that, according to the careful script, fed the entire valley. Her father had thought it was a geological curiosity. Evelyn saw it for what it was, the life of the land, the very thing Kane's mines would poison. She had fled, taking what little money she had, and bought passage on a coach heading west. But word had moved faster. She saw men who matched the description of Kane's security at a way station. She had slipped off the coach and used her last dollars to bribe a freight hauler to hide her. He was a sour, silent man who had taken her money and pointed to the tarps without a word. For 2 days, she had ridden in the dark, joints aching, listening to the man curse his mules. Now, he had stopped. "This is as far as I go," his voice rumbled from outside her canvas cave. "Dry Willow. End of the line for me." Evelyn's blood ran cold. Dry Willow? She had heard of it. A rough outpost, Kane's territory. She was supposed to be going to Maple Bend, to find a judge, to plead her case. She pushed the tarp aside, wincing as the cold wind hit her face. The driver was already unhitching his mules. He did not look at her. "Please," she whispered, her throat raw. "I paid you to get me to the pass." "And I am telling you, the pass is closed," he grunted. "Too much snow. And I heard word of renegades. I am not losing my mules for you." He was lying. She knew it. He was afraid, or worse, he had been paid by someone else. She climbed out, clutching her satchel. The town was just ahead, a line of ugly buildings huddled against the river. It looked like the bleakest place on earth. "What about my money?" she asked, trying to sound strong. The driver finally looked at her. His eyes were flat. "You got your ride. Now get before someone sees you with me." He turned his back on her. Evelyn stood alone, a well-dressed, educated woman from the East, covered in filth, holding a stolen contract in a town run by the very man she was fleeing. She looked up at the mountains, red and indifferent. She felt a surge of despair so cold it threatened to freeze her where she stood. Far above, on the ridge, Tunataani had stopped his pony. He looked back at the town, and then east, toward the pass. The wind was picking up. The high, wailing song of the rocks sounded less like a warning, and more like a lament. A storm was coming. He could feel the first drops of icy rain on his face, mixing with the red dust. He pulled his blanket tight and urged his pony toward the shelter of his hidden cabin. The rain had come just after dusk. not as a gentle promise, but as a cold, driving assault. It turned the dust to mud and the mud to a running slick. Tunata'ani sat cross-legged in his cabin, the small fire in the center hearth his only companion. The cabin was high on the mesa, built into a fold of rock so that it was invisible from the valley below. It was small, just one room, but it was solid, built of stone and juniper logs he had carried himself. He was mending a leather strap, his hands moving with an efficient, practiced grace. The storm outside was a roar, a solid wall of sound, but inside there was the smell of wood smoke, cedar, and the dry herbs that hung from the rafters. This was his sanctuary, the place he came to restore his ho-ho. The balance of his world had been tilted for a long time, and places like Dry Willow only tilted it further. Here, he was just a man. He finished the stitch, tested the strength of the repair, and was setting the awl aside when he heard it. It was not a sound of the storm. It was not the wind's wail or the crack of a falling branch. It was thin, high, and human. A cry. It was swallowed almost instantly by the thunder, but two had heard it. He was on his feet in a single, fluid motion. He did not pause to think. A cry for help was a line pulled taut, and he was bound to follow it. He grabbed his heavy wool blanket, his rifle, and slipped out into the night. The wind tore at him, the rain hitting his face like handfuls of sharp pebbles. He was soaked in seconds, but he paid it no mind. He moved down the slick goat path that was the only approach to his cabin, his moccasins finding purchase on the wet stone where boots would have slipped and broken an ankle. He followed the sound, or the memory of it, down toward the river. The river itself was a monster, a churning, roaring throat of brown water and debris. It had already risen, swallowing its banks, and was tearing at the roots of the cottonwoods. Then he heard it again, louder this time, a sharp crack, the splintering of wood, followed by a long, terrible scream that was cut short. He ran. He burst through the line of willows at the river's edge and stopped, his eyes scanning the chaos. A flash of lightning lit the scene for a terrible, stark second. There, half in the water, was the wreckage of a carriage. It had been coming down the high road, the one that clung to the canyon wall, and had clearly been run off. One wheel was spinning uselessly in the air. The horses were gone, or drowned. But the scream... He saw movement in the water. Not wreckage, but something pale, a patch of white, snagged for a moment on a submerged log. Then, torn free by the current, it was a person, a woman. Tu did not hesitate. He dropped the rifle and the blanket and ran along the bank, matching the current's speed, looking for a place to intercept. The river was a freezing, murderous force. He knew this water. He knew it wanted to kill. He saw a bend ahead, where the water briefly pooled before a set of rapids. She would be swept into those rapids and broken in moments. He sprinted, his legs pumping, and launched himself into the torrent just ahead of her. The cold was a physical blow. It punched the air from his lungs and wrapped his muscles in ice. He fought the shock, forced his arms to move, and swam with the current, his eyes fixed on the shape. He reached her. He grabbed a handful of cloth, a sodden wool coat. She was limp, a dead weight. He got an arm under her chest, turned her face from the water, and fought. He swam against the pull of the rapids, fighting not just for her life, but for his own, aiming for the small eddy he had spotted. His feet touched the bottom. It was mud, sucking at him, but it was bottom. He heaved, dragging her out of the main current, and then, with a strength that came from desperation, he hauled her from the water. He collapsed on the muddy bank, gasping, the freezing air burning his lungs. The woman lay beside him, unmoving. He rolled her onto her side. She was small, pale. Her hair was a dark, wet mat. Her clothes were in tatters, ripped and shredded not by violence, but by the rocks and the river. A long, dark bruise was already forming on her temple. He put his ear to her mouth. A breath, shallow, faint, but it was there. She was dying, not from the blow, but from the cold. He knew he had only minutes. He looked around, his mind racing. Back to the carriage. This was no accident. He stood, his senses sharp despite the cold, and moved toward the wreckage. His eyes, accustomed to the darkness, picked out the details. The carriage had not just slipped. The ground here was torn up. He found them, boot prints. Not the small, neat boots of a carriage driver. These were heavy, waffle stomper boots, the kind miners and gunmen wore. And there were many. He counted at least 4 sets of tracks, maybe 5. They had been waiting. They had forced the carriage off the road. This was an ambush. He moved back to the woman. She was clutching something, her fingers frozen around the leather strap of a small satchel. The same satchel he had seen her with in town. No, this was different, smaller, finer. The one she had hidden under her coat. It was the one that held her life. He gently pried her fingers from it. He had to get her warm. He looked down. Inside the open flap of her soaked coat, he saw a small, oilskin packet tucked into an inner pocket. It was separate from the satchel. He pulled it free. It was a wax-sealed envelope, heavy and stiff, even soaked. The wax held, it felt like a book, or papers. He recognized the importance of it instinctively. This was the reason for the boot prints. This was the reason for the ambush. He tucked it inside his own shirt, against his skin, where his body heat would protect it. He looked back at the carriage. One last time, scanning for anything else. His hand brushed a splintered piece of the frame. There was a mark on it, cut deep. It was not from the crash. It was a number, cut deep and deliberate. 13. He knew the mark, Barrett Kane's number. His blood went cold, colder than the river. This changed everything. This was not just a random act of violence. This was the long, grasping arm of the mining company. They had tried to kill this woman. He looked down at her. Evelyn Hart, the woman who had been dumped in Dry Willow, the one who was running. He had not known her name, but he had seen the terror in her face that morning. Now, she was his responsibility. The social tension was a sudden, sharp pain. She was a white woman. He was a dying man. To be found with her, in this state, would be a death sentence. To take her to his people would be to bring Kane's war to their door. To take her to Dry Willow was impossible. Kane's men were there, and so was Marshal Locke. They would finish the job. He had no choice. There was only one place. He scooped her up. She was light, a fragile weight in his arms. He wrapped his own heavy, wet blanket around her, covering her, and began the climb. It was a hard, treacherous ascent. The rocks were slick with rain. He moved carefully, his own body shaking with cold and exertion, shielding her from the worst of the wind. He climbed up the hidden path, away from the river, away from the road, up into the high, lonely country that was his home. The pony whinnied softly as he approached the cabin. The animal was huddled against the rock wall, sheltering from the storm. He pushed the door open with his shoulder. The cabin was warm. The small fire still glowed. A bed of red coals. He laid her down gently on his own sleeping furs, close to the fire but not too close. She was pale as death, her lips a faint blue. Her breathing was a small, rattling whisper. He had saved her from the river. Now, he had to save her from the cold. He looked at her, a stranger, an outsider, a woman who had brought the violence of the world to his door. But she was alive, and he, Tanat Ani, had made a choice the moment he jumped into that water. He would not let her die. He began to stoke the fire, the flames licking up, casting dancing shadows on the stone walls, illuminating the man and the woman, alone, at the heart of the storm. Evelyn Hart woke to the smell of wood smoke and a strange, deep warmth. Her first sensation was of stillness, the bone-rattling crash of the wagon, the roar of the river, the freezing, frantic scramble. It was all gone, replaced by a profound, heavy quiet. She was wrapped in furs, thick and smelling of cedar and a faint, clean animal musk. A small fire burned in a stone hearth in the center of the room, the smoke rising through a hole in the roof. The walls were not wood, but stone, built into the side of a mountain, the rough rock face exposed on one side. She was not in the river, she was alive. Her second sensation was pain, a dull, heavy throb behind her right eye. She moved to touch it, and her hand, thin and pale, was brushed by another. She froze. He was sitting not 5 feet from her, still as the rock wall behind him. The firelight caught the planes of his face, the strong line of his nose, the dark, unreadable eyes that watched her without expression. He was the man from the town, the Dine Scout. Panic, cold and sharp as the river water, flooded her. She tried to sit up, a strangled cry catching in her throat, and the movement sent a wave of dizziness through her. The furs fell away, and she looked down. She was not in her own clothes. Her soaked, shredded wool dress was gone. She was wrapped in a dry, heavy wool blanket, and beneath it, she could feel a simple, homespun shirt that was far too large for her. "Where? Who?" she stammered, scrambling backward, pulling the furs up to her chin. Her eyes darted around the small cabin. There was no one else. The man did not move. He simply watched her, his hands resting on his knees. "You were in the river," he said. His voice was quiet, a low baritone that seemed to be part of the stone itself. "You were drowning. I pulled you out." "The river, it came back in a rush, the horses screaming, the splintering crash as the carriage toppled, the shock of the icy water closing over her head." "The driver," she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "Mr. Evans, was he? Did you find?" Tu shook his head, a single, slow motion. "Only you." Evelyn closed her eyes. Guilt, swift and choking, rose in her. Mr. Evans had been a kind man, a widower with a bad cough who had agreed to take her to Maple Bend for $20. He had been nervous. He had said the road was bad, and she had insisted. She had killed him. "They were waiting," she said, the words spilling out, her voice cracking. "It was not an accident. They ran us off the road, men with rifles." Toe's expression did not change, but a new intensity entered his gaze. "I saw the tracks," he said, "and the mark on the carriage. 13. Evelyn's head snapped up. "You know it." "Barrett Kane," he said. The name, spoken aloud in this safe, warm place, felt like a violation. It brought the entire ugly world crashing in. He wants to kill me," she whispered, her entire body beginning to shake. Not from cold, but from sheer terror. "He wants—" She stopped, her hands moving frantically, patting the furs, searching for the one thing that mattered. "My satchel, my papers, where are they?" Tu reached to his side and picked up the oilskin packet. It was damp, but intact. He held it out to her. "This was in your coat. Your satchel is gone. The river took it." She let out a small sob of relief and snatched the packet from him. Her fingers, numb and clumsy, fumbled with the wax seal. It was her father's seal. She broke it and pulled out the contents. There were 2 items. The first was the contract, the one she had stolen from her father's desk. The brittle paper was stiff with damp, but the ink, though faded, was legible. The second was the small, leather-bound notebook. She opened it, her hands trembling, praying the water had not destroyed it. The careful, spidery script and the fine-lined maps were blurred, but readable. "This," she said, her voice rising with a desperate, hysterical energy. "This is why—" Tu watched her, his face impassive. "What is it?" "It is a map," she said, pushing the notebook toward him. "But not of the land. My father, he commissions these geological surveys. He thought it was a curiosity. It is a map of the water, the underground water, aquifers, streams. It says here it feeds every well and every spring in this valley. Miller Creek, the town, all of it. Toe's gaze sharpened. He took the book. He could not read the words, but he understood the lines, the way they followed the contours of the land he knew as well as his own hand. Water was life. The Dain called themselves the water drinkers. This map was a map of the land's very soul. "And this," Evelyn continued, her voice dripping with a sudden, cold anger as she held up the contract, "is the poison." She told him everything. The words poured out of her. The story of her father, Robert Hart, a man who saw land not as a home but as a number in a ledger. The story of the New Century Mining Corporation. And Barrett Kane. "They want the land at Miller Creek," she explained, her fingers tracing the words on the contract. "For a hydraulic mine, they will use arsenic, mercury. It will poison everything. This map proves it. It proves they know the water is there and they will poison it anyway." She stabbed a finger at the paper. "My father, he agreed. He signed a deal with Kane. But there was a condition. The land is not just his part of it. The most important part was left to my mother, and it passed to me. It cannot be sold without my signature." She laughed, a short, bitter sound. "So they found another way. This is not just a land deal. It is a marriage contract." Toe's eyes narrowed. "They arranged for me to be married," Evelyn said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "To one of Kane's partners, a man from back east. In exchange for my hand, my new husband would sign over my rights to the land. My father signed. Marshall Locke, the man in Dry Willow. He signed as a witness. They thought they could force me." She looked up at him, her eyes burning with a feverish light. "But they were too eager. Look!" She pointed to a line at the bottom. "It says the contract is only in full effect upon the completion of the marriage ceremony and the signature of all parties. They filed it with the territorial court, but I never signed. I ran. I took this. Without my signature, and without the marriage, it is void. It is fraud." She slumped back against the furs, the energy leaving her as quickly as it had come. "They ran us off the road to get these papers back, and to silence me. They killed Mr. Evans to get to me." She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. "It is my fault. It is all my fault." To sat for a long time, watching her. He looked at the map, at the contract, at the woman who had brought this firestorm to his mountain. His mind was a whirl of conflict. His life was built on the principle of hosho, of walking in beauty, of maintaining balance. This woman was the embodiment of chaos. She was Bilagana, the white world, the world of paper contracts and casual murder, the world that had taken his own family. His first instinct was to take her to the reservation boundary and leave her. Let her people deal with her. But which people? The ones like Kane, who hunted her, or the ones like the settlers in Dry Willow, who would see a Dain man with a white woman in disarray and ask for a rope? Not an explanation. He had saved her. The river had delivered her to him. In the way of the Dain. Her life was now his responsibility. He had made a choice in the water. He could not unmake it on the land. But helping her meant inviting Kane's war. It meant putting his own community, what was left of it, at risk. He rose, his movement silent, and went to the small, hide-covered opening that served as a window. He pulled the hide back a few inches. The rain had stopped. The world was a wash of gray. And rising from the smoke hole of his hidden cabin was a thin, pale gray plume of smoke. In this clear, cold air, it would be visible for miles to anyone who knew where to look. "They will find the wreckage this morning," he said, his back to her. "They will see you are not there. They will search." Evelyn's head came up, her face pale. "They will track you." "They will track this," he said, indicating the smoke. "A scout will see it." He let the hide fall back into place. Time was gone. He turned back to her. His decision made. "I have a cousin," he said. "Dawson Begay. His father was Dain. His mother was white. He lives between their world and mine. He can speak to the sheriff in the county seat, not Locke, but the real sheriff, a man named Dawson. He is a good man. They say my cousin will ride for him." Evelyn stared at him, confused. "Your cousin, but why would you? You do not even know me." Tu walked back to the fire and picked up a piece of dried meat, handing it to her. "Eat, you will need your strength." She took it, but did not eat. "Why?" she asked again, her voice a whisper. "Why are you helping me?" He crouched before her, so close she could see the flecks of brown in his dark eyes. His gaze was steady, and for the first time, she saw something other than impassivity. She saw a deep, settled sadness, and a will as hard as the mountain. "I do not know why the river brought you to me," he said, his voice low. "But it did. I made a choice in the water. I will not let you die in the dirt. I will protect you until you can choose. I will not own you. I will not trade you. You will make your own choice." He said it simply, as a statement of fact, but to Evelyn, who had been treated as property by her own father, the words were a revelation. It was the first time in her life a man had spoken to her of her own choice. She looked at this man, this stranger, this savage, as the men in Dry Willow would call him, and she felt, for the first of time in weeks, a feeling other than terror. It was a fragile, unfamiliar thing. It was trust. "What do we do?" she asked. Tu stood. "We cannot stay here. Marshal Locke is bought. Kane's men are his. We must go to Maple Bend. I have heard of the judge there. Hadley. He is a hard man, but he is not owned." He began to move, his actions precise and economical. He gathered a small pouch of cornmeal, the dried meat, his rifle. "We must take these papers to him," he continued. "But we must be fast. Kane will not wait. When he finds the wreckage, he will go to Locke. He will say you stole these papers. He will say you are a thief, or insane. He will have Locke make a warrant, a poster. Then every gunman and bounty hunter in the territory will be hunting you for a reward. We must move before he can use their law against us." He turned and pulled a bundle from a high shelf. He unrolled it. Inside were women's clothes, simple, dine clothing, a dark wool skirt, a buckskin shirt, and moccasins. They were old, but cared for, and they were small. He placed them beside her, his face for a moment unreadable, his eyes fixed on the clothes as if seeing a ghost. "These will be warm," he said, his voice softer. "And they will not mark you as a white woman from a distance. Change. We leave when the light is full." He turned and went outside, leaving her alone in the warmth of the cabin, with the clothes of a ghost and the first fragile spark of hope. Evelyn Hart drew the buckskin shirt over her head. The wool of the dine skirt was heavy, and the moccasins felt impossibly soft and light after a life of hard leather heels. The clothes were foreign, yet they felt like a shield. The woman who had worn them was a ghost in the small cabin, a presence Evelyn could not name, but she felt a strange kinship with the fabric. She was hiding, just as these clothes had been hidden. Tunata Ani pushed the door open, a gust of wind and icy rain following him inside. He carried an armload of split juniper. He did not look at her directly, but he saw the change. He nodded, once, a small sign of approval, and went to the fire. "The storm is not leaving," he said, his back to her as he skillfully coaxed the coals. "It has settled. We cannot leave." Evelyn's fragile hope faltered. "But you said we have to get to the judge before the warrant." "We cannot get to the judge if we are frozen on the high trail," he said simply. He turned. The firelight played across his face, and he seemed less a man and more a part of the stone and wind outside. "We will wait for the storm to break. They will be looking for us near the river, near the wreckage. They will not look this high, not in this weather. For now, this is the one safe place." The cabin was a small, warm bubble in a world of roaring chaos. The wind shrieked, a high, thin sound, and the rain turned to sleet, rattling against the thick door. To check the bruise on her temple, his touch surprisingly light, almost detached. He reapplied a damp, cool cloth he had soaked in a bucket of water from a barrel. His movements were efficient, economical. He was a man who wasted nothing, not a word, not a motion, not a piece of wood. He gave her a small cup of hot, thin cornmeal mush. It was grainy and plain, but it was warm, and it pushed back the cold that had settled deep in her bones. They sat in silence for a long time, the only sounds the fire's crackle and the storm's fury. Evelyn found her gaze drawn to the knife on his belt. It was a practical, heavy-bladed tool, the sheath worn smooth with use. But tied to the leather thong at its base was a small, bright tuft of blue feathers, almost like a tassel. So old the edges were frayed, it seemed a strange, small piece of vanity on such a severe man.
It is beautiful,"
she said, her voice quiet, mostly just to break the suffocating silence. His hand, which had been resting on his knee, went to the knife hilt. His fingers brushed the feathers. His face, which she had only ever seen as a mask of calm impassivity, tightened. A flicker of some deep, old pain crossed his features before he mastered it. "It was my brother's," he said. The words were quiet, not meant for her, but for the fire. "My Talash Chini, my younger brother. He loved the bluebirds. He said they carried the sky on their backs. He believed they were messengers of the sun." Evelyn stayed very still, afraid the slightest movement would break the confidence. "What was his name?" "Little Swift." To said, he was not strong like the other boys, but he was fast, and he saw things others did not. He saw the birds. He paused, his thumb rubbing the worn leather. "The sickness that came through the valley 10 winters ago, the one the army doctors brought to the reservation. It took my wife, it took my son, and it took Little Swift. He was 14 years. Evelyn closed her eyes. The weight of his loss filled the small cabin, pressing down on her, the clothes she was wearing. She realized with a cold certainty had belonged to his wife. She was wrapped in his grief. "You lost everyone," she whispered. "All of them. And yet you saved me, a stranger, a white woman." He finally turned his head and looked at her. His gaze was no longer impassive. It was sharp, intense, and it pinned her to the furs. "I told you, the river brought you. That was a choice the water made, but sitting here in my cabin, with Cain's men hunting you and a storm trying to tear down the mountain, this is a new choice. This one is mine." He moved, not with the quickness she had seen before, but with a deliberate, solemn weight. He sat on the stone floor near the furs where she rested, so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Evelyn Hart," he said, the sound of her name strange in his mouth. "I gave you my word. I will take you to Judge Hadley. I will see that your story is heard. I will keep you safe from the men who hunt you." He held up his hand, palm open. It was not a gesture of supplication or of comfort. It was a pledge, a hard, calloused hand, marked with scars she could not read. "I will not be your father," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I will not be the men who tried to buy and sell you. I will not trade you. I will not own you. That is not the way of my people." He looked directly into her eyes. "Tachoba naashti," he said, the dying words a stark, beautiful string of sounds. "I choose to protect you. I do not choose to possess you, but you must also choose. You must choose to trust me. This path will be hard, and if you do not trust, we will both fall." Evelyn looked at his outstretched hand. This was the realest thing that had happened to her. More real than the violence. More real than her father's betrayal. This was a choice, freely offered. A promise given by a man who had lost everything. A man who had every reason to hate her people. She put her small, pale hand into his. His fingers closed around hers. Not crushing, but solid. as solid as the mountain. It was not a lover's touch. It was a warrior's. It was a bond, sealed in firelight and storm. "I trust you," she whispered, and in that moment, she did. The storm broke just before dawn. The sudden silence was more alarming than the wind had been. Tu was on his feet instantly, his hand on his rifle. He moved to the small hide that covered the window slit and pulled it aside a fraction of an inch. He was still for a full minute, listening, watching. Then he let the hide fall. His face was grim. "They are here," he said, his voice a low whisper. Evelyn's blood turned to ice. How do you know I do not hear anything?" "The wind has stopped. The snow is fresh on the ground. A magpie just called a warning from the low branches. It should be on the high rock. It sees something it does not like." He moved to the door, listening. "They are close. 3 men. They found the smoke." He was already in motion. He kicked dirt onto the fire, extinguishing it in a cloud of hiss and steam, plunging the cabin into gray darkness. "We do not go out the door. They will be watching the door." He moved to the back wall of the cabin, the part that was the mountain itself. Evelyn had thought it was solid rock, but he pushed against a large, flat slab that looked no different from the rest, with a low, grinding scrape. The stone moved, pivoting on a hidden point, revealing a dark, narrow crack. It was an opening, barely wider than a man's shoulders, leading into blackness. "This is the path of the Black Rock," he whispered, pushing his rifle and a small pack through first. "It goes up, not down. They will expect us to run for the valley, for the river. We go to the high ridge. Stay behind me. Do not make a sound." Evelyn's heart was hammering against her ribs so hard she was sure the men outside could hear it. She scrambled into the opening, to push the stone back into place, sealing them in absolute darkness. She heard him moving ahead of her. She followed the sound of his breathing. The passage was a nightmare. It was a volcanic fissure, a lava tube, barely a path. They climbed, mostly using their hands, the rock sharp and cold. Evelyn's breath came in ragged gasps. After what felt like an eternity, she saw a sliver of gray light. They emerged into the freezing dawn air, high on the ridge, 1,000 feet above the cabin. Below, she could see 3 figures, small as ants, kicking in the door of the cabin. They had found it. They were too late. "We move," Tu said, and he set a pace that was just short of a run. The land they crossed was brutal. It was not the rolling hills of her home. It was a land of rock, wind, and distance. The melting snow and rain had turned the arroyos into small, raging rivers of brown, churning water. At one, they had to stop, the torrent too wide to jump. Tu uncoiled a thin, strong rope from his pack, tied it around his waist, and waded in. The water was waist-deep, and the current almost took him, but he fought it, secured the rope on the other side, and pulled her across. She was soaked and freezing again by the time she reached the far bank. As they climbed a steep shale slide, the ground above them gave way. A section of the cliff, loosened by the water, cracked and fell, a shower of rocks. From pebbles to stones the size of her head, rained down. Tu grabbed her, shoving her flat against the cliff face, shielding her with his own body. The rocks clattered past them, the sound echoing in the canyon. When it was quiet, he pushed off her. His arm was bleeding, a long gash from a sharp stone. "You are hurt," she said. "It is nothing," he said, tearing a strip of cloth from his shirt and binding it tightly. "We keep moving." That night, they huddled in a shallow cave, wind-bitten and exhausted. Evelyn thought they were hopelessly lost. But Tu pointed up. The clouds had cleared. The sky was a vast, brilliant blanket of stars. "We are not lost," he said, pointing to a configuration. "The star that does not move. Nahukos. It guides us. And that," he pointed to another, "tells us the hour." He cupped his hands to his mouth and made a sound. A high, sharp, yipping bark. It sounded exactly like a coyote. He did it 3 times. They waited in the cold silence. Then, far off to the north, an answer came. 2 yips, then 1. A small, tight smile touched Toe's lips. "Dawson Bigay, my cousin. He waits for us. The camp is close." They reached the camp an hour before dawn. It was not a town, not even a village. Just 3 hogans, the traditional round houses of the Dine, tucked perfectly into a canyon fold, invisible until you were upon them. Dawson Bigay met them. He was younger than Toe, his face a blend of his Dine father and his white mother. He wore a cowboy hat, but his boots were moccasins. He looked at Toe, then at Evelyn, and his face was troubled. "Ashki," he said to Toe, "cousin, you bring the world's trouble to our door." "I bring a woman who needs help," Toe said, "and I bring this." He showed him the map. An old woman emerged from the central hogan. She was tiny, her face a beautiful map of wrinkles, her eyes as bright and sharp as a bird's. She was Shidi Yazi, an elder, a medicine woman. She looked at Evelyn, at her soaked clothes, her pale face, and the crude bandage on her head. She clucked her tongue, a sound of disapproval, and barked a command in Dine. She bustled Evelyn inside, sat her by the fire, and expertly unwrapped the cut. She tutted at the wound, then took a small stone bowl and mixed a green-gray paste of herbs. It smelled of pine and damp earth. She applied it gently, and the throbbing pain in Evelyn's head began to ease almost instantly. She gave Evelyn a cup of hot, bitter tea. The elder, Shidi Yazi, then turned to Toe and spoke, her voice firm. He listened, his head bowed in respect. When she was done, Evelyn asked him, "What did she say?" "She reminded me of Hosho," Toe said, his eyes on the fire. "Of balance. She said I'm walking in the Bilagana world now, the world of courts and paper. She said I must not let their anger become my anger. I must walk in beauty, even in their ugly places." 2 young men, their faces hard, had come to the door, rifles in their hands. They saw Evelyn, and their expressions darkened. "Why is a white woman here?" one of them asked in rough English. "They bring only sickness and soldiers." "This one is different," Toe said, rising to his full height. "They are all the same," the others said, spitting onto the ground outside. "They take our land. They poison our water." "This is why she is here," Toe said, his voice cutting through the tension. He unrolled the map. "She carries this, a map of the water, our water. She is running from Barrett Kane. She is trying to stop him from poisoning the water." The young men fell silent. They looked at the map. They did not understand the words, but they understood the lines. They understood the water. This was a language they all spoke. The woman's race mattered less than the water's life. Shidi Yazi spoke one final, sharp word. The young men lowered their rifles. The argument was over. "We split here," Toe said, turning to his cousin. "Dawson Bigay, you are the faster rider. You know their ways. Ride to the county seat. Do not go near Dry Willow. Find Sheriff Dawson, the real sheriff. Tell him Kane's men are murdering. Tell him Marshal Locke is a part of it. Give him this." Toe handed him a piece of leather with a map scratched on it. "Tell him to meet us in Maple Bend. Tell him to bring the law." Dawson Bigay nodded, his face set. "And you, cousin?" "We will cut through Red Hollow," Toe said. "It is exposed, but it is fast. It will save us a day's ride." He looked at Evelyn. "We must get to Judge Hadley before the warrant does. We must get there before they can paint us as the criminals." Red Hollow was a gash in the earth, a thin, deep canyon that looked as if a giant had struck the rock with an axe. It was, as Toe had said, the fastest route, saving them a full day. It was also the most exposed. The wind howled through the narrows, a constant, high-pitched scream. They rode hard. the pony's hooves striking sparks on the flinty trail. At the center of the hollow was the bridge. It was an old, wooden trestle bridge, built by miners a decade before and never repaired. It spanned a chasm so deep the bottom was lost in shadow. The planks rattled and groaned under the pony's weight. Evelyn hated it. She hated the height, the noise, the feeling of total vulnerability. She held her breath, her eyes fixed on Toe's back. He was halfway across when he stopped. He did not turn. He simply froze, his head cocked, listening to a sound she could not hear over the wind. "What is it?" she called out. He held up a hand for silence. He scanned the far side of the canyon rim. "Sun on metal," he said, his voice a low, tight command. "Ride, now, fast!" He kicked his pony, and the animal leaped forward. Evelyn did the same, her heart pounding. As they reached the far side, the ground erupted in front of them. A spray of dirt and rock chips exploded where a bullet struck. "Ambush!" Two yelled. He was off his pony in an instant, dragging her down with him. He pulled his rifle from its scabbard. Another shot whined past her head. So close she felt the heat of its passage. "They were waiting for us," Tu said, his eyes scanning the rocks above. Kane is smart. He knew this pass. 3 men on horseback burst from a side canyon, charging down on them, rifles firing. "We cannot fight them here," Tu yelled, grabbing his pony's reins. "To the bridge! It is our only way!" He shoved her onto her pony, slapped its rump, and vaulted onto his own. They galloped back onto the rickety bridge, the riders hot behind them. Bullets splintered the wood around them. "They have us trapped!" Evelyn screamed. Looking back, the 3 men had stopped at the head of the bridge. They were not following. One of them, a big man she recognized from Dry Willow, was grinning. He raised his hand. Evelyn saw it then. A thin, dark line of rope strung across the far end of the bridge, the end they had just come from. It was a tripwire, set to catch them on the first pass. The big man, Pike, laughed. "Nowhere to run. Injun, we got you." Tu pulled his pony to a halt in the center of the bridge, the animal dancing nervously on the loose planks. He looked behind them, at the rope. Then he looked ahead, at the 3 men. His face was a mask of cold fury. "What are they doing?" Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling. Toe's gaze was fixed on something near Pike's feet, a bundle of sticks tied with wire, and a long, sputtering fuse. "Dynamite," Tu said, his voice flat. "They are not trying to trap us. They are trying to bury us." Pike lit the fuse. The small flame began to crawl toward the bundle. "You have got 10 seconds. Injun!" he roared. "Give us the girl and the papers, or go meet your gods." Evelyn looked at the chasm below. Her life had been reduced to a choice between fire and falling. Tu said nothing. He simply raised his rifle. His body became perfectly still. He was not aiming at the men. He was aiming at the tiny, sputtering spark. "Tu, you cannot," Evelyn whispered. "It is too far. The wind." "Be the rock," he said, his voice a low hum. He let out a slow, steady breath, the one he had taught her. The rifle cracked. The sound was sharp, final. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The fuse still sputtered. Then, with a small poof, the spark vanished. The fuse, cut clean, lay dark and smoking on the rock. Pike's grin disappeared. He stared, his mouth open, unable to comprehend. In that moment of stunned silence, Tu raised his rifle higher. He fired again, not at the men, but at the rock face just above them. A puff of dust exploded from the rock, and a second later, the sound of the shot echoed back. "That was your warning." Toe's voice boomed across the canyon. "The next one will not miss." The gunmen, their trap broken and their nerve with it, scrambled for their horses. They looked at each other, at the dead fuse, and at the lone, unmoving figure on the bridge. This was not the easy payday they had been promised. They turned their horses and vanished back into the side canyon. 2 did not lower his rifle until they were long gone. He nudged his pony forward, rode to the end of the bridge, dismounted, and calmly cut the tripwire. He remounted and rode back to Evelyn. She was shaking so hard she could barely hold the reins. He did not say a word. He just looked at her, then turned his pony and rode off the bridge. She followed. They rode for 2 days, avoiding the main roads, cutting across a high, desolate plain. They came down into a small settlement, a place called Willow Pass. It was not much more than a collection of sod houses, a general store, and a notary office. As they dismounted, to put a hand on her arm, "Stay here." He walked over to the wall of the general store, where a half-dozen posters and notices were nailed. He stood looking at one for a long time before he tore it from the wall and brought it back to her. It was a wanted poster. Wanted, Evelyn Hart. For theft of private papers and embezzlement, $100 reward. There was a crude drawing that looked nothing like her. And then, at the bottom, in small, dense text, were the legal details, signed by Marshal R. Locke, Territorial Authority. All documents, maps, and contracts found in her possession. Evelyn read aloud, her voice draining of all life, are to be seized as evidence and returned to the custody of the court in Dry Willow. "It is the legal trap," To said, his voice grim. "Now we are not just running from Cain. We are running from the law. Your law." Evelyn slid down the wall of the store, the poster crumbling in her hand. "He has won," she whispered. "We can never get to Maple Bend. Even if we do, the first marshal who sees us will arrest me and take the papers. We are finished." "No." A new voice, old and reedy, joined theirs. "You are not finished. You are just fighting on the wrong ground." An old man stepped out of the notary office. He was ancient, with a wild halo of white hair and spectacles so thick they made his eyes look like strange, pale fish. He was Elton Gray, the territorial surveyor, now retired. "I overheard you," he said, peering at Evelyn. "You are the one, the girl with the map." How did you know?" Evelyn stammered. "News travels, even if it is not on a poster." Elton said, "Dawson Begay passed through here yesterday. He told me what his cousin was doing. He told me to expect you. He also told me what you were carrying." He looked at Toe and nodded, a sign of deep, old respect. "Tunat Ani, your father was a wise man. I see he passed it on. Now, let me see this map." They went into his small, dusty office. It was filled with books and rolled charts. Evelyn, her hands shaking, unrolled the notebook. Elton Gray spent an hour poring over it. He traced the lines with a gnarled finger. He made calculations on a piece of slate. Finally, he sat back, his face pale. "Sweet Mother of Mercy," he whispered. "It is worse than I thought. This is not just an aquifer. This is a closed system. It is the only water for 100 miles in every direction. If Cain poisons this, he is not just killing a valley. He is killing a county. It is murder, on a scale I cannot imagine." "Can you testify to that?" Evelyn asked, her voice urgent. "I can," Elton said. "But not in Maple Bend. Cain's men are already there. Dawson Begay saw them. They are watching the courthouse, waiting for you." He pulled out a fresh piece of paper. "We changed the plan. I will write an affidavit, a sworn statement, notarized, detailing everything I see in this map. It will have the force of my expert testimony. Then, you," he pointed at Two, "will take her and this paper to Judge Hadley. But you will not go to the courthouse. You will go to his home. You will give it to him directly." He dipped his pen. "This changes it from a simple theft charge to a matter of massive public endangerment. It makes your case bigger than Cain's warrant." "It took 2 hours," Elton wrote. The notary stamped, and the sun began to set. You must ride fast, Elton said, handing the precious sealed document to Tu. And you must ride smart. They were on their horses in minutes. The animals rested and fed. They rode out of Willow Pass just as the stars began to appear. That night, as they rode, Evelyn's composure, held together by the day's adrenaline, finally shattered. The reality of the wanted poster, the near death on the bridge, the weight of her father's betrayal, it all came down on her. She began to cry, silent, racking sobs that shook her entire body. Tu pulled his horse up. He sat, watching her, his face cast in the cold starlight. He did not move to comfort her, not in the way her people would. He just waited. He did this, she choked out, wiping her face with her sleeve. My own father. He signed me away. He made me a criminal. How do I fight that? How do I fight my own blood? Tu dismounted. He stood beside her horse, looking up at her. You are not your father, Evelyn Hart. I am, she cried. I am his daughter. I am weak. I am afraid. I am so afraid. Breathe, he said. It was not a suggestion. It was a command. She looked at him, confused, her breath catching in a sob. Breathe, he said again, his voice a low rhythm. He put his hand on his own chest. The way of the drum. 1, 2, let the air in, hold it, let it out. She tried, but her breath hitched. The fear is a storm, he said, his voice quiet, insistent, pulling her focus from the panic. You are not the storm. You are the rock. The storm crashes on the rock. The rock does not move. Feel the earth under you. Feel the horse breathing. That is real. The fear is just wind. He made her do it, again and again. In, hold, out. The simple rhythm, the sound of his voice, the cold, clean air it cut through the panic. Her sobs subsided. Her breathing slowed. She was still afraid, but the fear was no longer choking her. It was outside her. She was in the quiet place as he had called it. I am the rock, she whispered, testing the words. Yes, he said, now we ride. They rode for hours, until the ponies were spent. They stopped on a high, dark ridge, the sky above them a river of light. The Milky Way was so bright it cast a faint, pearlescent glow on the land. They sat with their backs to a large boulder, sharing a strip of dried meat, the horses cropping grass nearby. They were exhausted, but the quiet place held. Evelyn was so tired she could not hold her head up. It slumped, and she found herself resting against his shoulder. He stiffened, the buckskin of his shirt rigid against her cheek. She started to pull away, embarrassed. I am sorry. Do not be, he said, his voice rough. He did not move. After a moment, he relaxed, and his shoulder felt solid and warm through the cold night. Rest. They sat in silence, two small, tired figures under a vast, indifferent sky. You said you chose to protect me, she murmured, her voice thick with sleep. In the cabin. I did. I chose to trust you, she said, her eyes on the river of stars. I choose it again. He looked at her, at the top of her head resting on his shoulder. Then we are a T, he said. We are two, but we are one. One purpose, one path. Sleep, Evelyn Hart. We will need your strength. Far below them, in the valley, a new, angry, red star was born. The Langford family's barn, soaked in kerosene, went up in a sheet of flame. Barrett Kane watched from a nearby ridge, a cigarillo glowing in his hand. Pike was beside him. This will do it, Kane said, the firelight reflecting in his cold eyes. The settlers are terrified of the Dean. By morning, this whole town will be screaming for blood. They will be screaming for Marshal Locke to form a posse and hunt down every Indian in this valley, starting with Tunat Ani. And the girl? Pike asked. The girl will be forgotten in the chaos. Kane smiled. Sheriff Dawson, Judge Hadley, they cannot stop a mob. The law is what the people with the loudest voices say it is, and I'm about to make them scream. In the county seat, Sheriff Dawson, a man whose face was etched with the hard lines of a thankless job, read 2 messages. One was a scrawled note from Dawson Begay, delivered by hand, detailing a murder attempt and a conspiracy. The other was a frantic telegraph from Dry Willow, reporting a vicious Indian attack and a barn burning. He looked at Dawson Begay, who stood waiting in his office. Your cousin, the sheriff said, tapping the telegraph, seems to be a very busy man. My cousin, Dawson Begay replied, his voice even, is a man of honor. He does not burn barns. The sheriff looked at the 2 papers, his face a grim mask. I have one report of a murder plot by Barrett Kane, and another of an Indian war started by your cousin. They cannot both be true. He stood up, a tall, tired man who had seen too much. I am riding to Maple Bend. I am going to have Judge Hadley open his court, and I am going to put every single person involved in this mess under oath. The truth is in there, somewhere. He pinned his badge to his vest. You tell your cousin I am coming, and he had better be the man you say he is. The glow was not the dawn. As they crested the last ridge overlooking the network of valleys that led to Maple Bend, they saw it, a faint, angry, pulsing red against the pre-dawn indigo. It was too far east to be the town, but it was too large to be a campfire. What is it? Evelyn asked, her voice hushed by the cold. She was stiff, every muscle in her body a dull, protesting ache. Tunat Ani did not answer for a long time. He sniffed the wind, even from this distance, miles away. The air carried a faint, acrid taint, the smell of a life's work burning. It is a barn, he said, his voice flat, or a house, and it is in the direction of Dry Willow. He nudged his pony, his face a hard mask of stone. The time for rest was over. They rode hard for an hour, the ponies stumbling on the broken rock, and cut onto the main freight road. They had almost reached the junction when a wagon, its horses lathered in a white foam, came rattling and skidding around a bend, nearly colliding with them. A man, his face blotched with terror, hauled on the reins. It was Mr. Langford, the rancher whose land bordered the Dine territories. His eyes were wild. Langford, what is it? Tu asked, his voice a sharp command. Langford looked at Tu, and his face contorted. It was not with recognition, but with pure, unadulterated hatred. He fumbled for a shotgun on the wagon seat beside him. You! He shrieked, his voice cracking. You did this, you murdering savage! Put the gun down, Langford, Tu said, his voice dropping, but his hand did not move toward his own rifle. What has happened? My barn, Langford wept, the shotgun wavering in his hands. He burned my barn, Barrett Kane. He said it was renegades. He said it was you and... The man broke, his face crumbling into a mask of despair. He took my children, my Sarah and my Timmy. He said he would trade them. He said he would trade their lives for yours. Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth, a small, choked sound escaping her. This was the move. This was Kane's escalation. He had not just created a lie, he had taken hostages. He had turned the entire simmering resentment of the valley into a personal, vicious war, and he had placed Tu at the center of it. He is not in this alone, Langford sobbed, the fight gone out of him, the shotgun slumping. Marshal Locke, he is with him. He is raising a posse in Dry Willow. He told them you kidnapped the Hart woman, and now you have taken my children. They are coming to kill you. They are coming to kill every Dine they find. The air crackled with the awful new reality. The wanted poster was a child's game compared to this. Kane had created a mob. Where? Langford. Tu's voice was like ice. Where did he take them? The old quarry, Langford whispered. his eyes hollow. "The one by Twisted Creek. He said to bring you there by sunrise. Or, he has 2 men with him." To said it was not a question. "Pike," Langford nodded, numb. "And the one they call Breaker, just them and Mr. Kane." "No," Tu corrected him. "Kane is not there. He would not be there. He is in the saloon in Dry Willow, buying whiskey for the posse, telling them to wait for his word. This is Pike's work. It is clumsy, and it is loud." He looked at the sky. The first gray light was staining the east. They had, perhaps, an hour. "We must go to Sheriff Dawson," Evelyn said, her voice shaking. "We have to get the law." "We are the law for them," Tu said, turning his pony. "Dawson is a day's ride away, in Maple Bend. By the time he acts, the children will be dead, and the posse will be on the reservation. This ends now, at the quarry." "Us?" Evelyn looked at him, her fear a cold, hard knot. "Tu, we cannot. They are armed. They are killers." "Yes," he said. He looked at her, his eyes holding hers, pulling her back to the quiet place. "Breathe. Evelyn Hart. We are not going there to fight. We are going there to win. We are going to take the children, and we are going to take the proof." They rode, not in a charge, but in a ground-eating lope, cutting away from the road, using the arroyos and the folds of the land to hide their approach. The quarry was a deep bowl carved out of a sandstone cliff, with only one real entrance. They left the ponies a mile back and climbed the rim, coming at it from above. They lay flat on the cold rock, looking down. It was just as Tu had predicted. Pike and Breaker were there, huddled around a small, smoky fire. The 2 Langford children, a small girl of perhaps 8 and a boy of 10, were tied back to back against a powder barrel. They were terrified, but quiet, their faces streaked with tears and soot. "They are waiting," Tu whispered, his words a puff of white in the cold air. "They are lazy. They watch the entrance. They do not watch the sky." "How do we get them?" Evelyn's voice was a bare thread of sound. Toe's gaze was fixed, not on the men, but on the wind. It was blowing steadily, a light breeze from their position down into the quarry bowl. He then looked at his own pack, which he had set beside him. He pulled out the small, deerskin bag that held his fire-starting kit, and the other, larger bag that held the cold milled cornmeal and ash from their last fire. "You are good with your hands," he said. "You were a teacher. You write small." He pulled out his knife. "Take the mirror." He unlaced a small, polished silver concho from his belt. It was not a perfect mirror, but it caught the new, rising sunlight and threw a dazzling, bright spot. "When I make the signal," he said, handing it to her, "you will put the sun in Pike's eyes. The big one. Hold it there. Do not let it move. Keep him blind. Can you do that?" She nodded, her hand closing around the cool metal. "And you?" "I," he said, "will use the wind." He took the bag of ash. "When he is blind, he will be angry. He and the other one will stand up, cussing. The moment they are on their feet, I will give the ash to the wind. It will blind them both. That is when I go. Go to, you will be killed. You have no—" "I am not going to kill them," he said, his voice a razor's edge. "I am going to stop them. Give me 10 heartbeats after the ash, then go to the children. Cut them free. Run for the entrance. Do not wait for me. Do not look back. Do not look back." "I will not leave you," she said, her voice fierce. "You will," he said, his gaze hard. "You will save the children. That is the only thing that matters. That is the only way we win. Now, get ready." He moved to a different position, 20 yards away. Evelyn crawled to the lip of the rock, the silver concho in her hand. She found Pike's face. She waited. Toe's voice, a low whistle like a hawk's cry, cut the air. Evelyn angled the concho. A brilliant, Sudden starburst of light exploded in the quarry. It struck Pike full in the face. He roared, throwing a hand up. "What in the— My eyes—" Breaker stood up, confused. "What is it?" "It is the sun, you fool. It is just—" Pike staggered, rubbing his eyes, completely blind. Toe's hawk cry came again. He stood up, a dark silhouette against the gray sky, and threw the contents of the bag into the air. The fine, powdery ash hung for a moment, and then the wind caught it, carrying it down into the quarry like a sudden, gray fog. It hit the two men just as they were rubbing their eyes. The ash, fine as flour, coated their faces, their mouths, their open eyes. The effect was instantaneous and brutal. They were not just blinded, they were choking. They dropped their rifles, clawing at their faces, screaming in pain and confusion. Before their screams had fully echoed, Two was moving. He had not gone down the rocks. He had dropped, a 12-foot fall, landing silent as a cat on the quarry floor. He was on Breaker first. The man was still fumbling for his pistol. Toe's hand, rigid, struck the man's throat. Breaker did not make a sound. He just collapsed, his air cut off. Pike, still roaring, managed to pull his own gun. He fired wildly into the cloud of ash. "I will kill you, Injun!" "You will not," Toe's voice said, and he seemed to be everywhere at once. Pike fired again, at the voice, but Toe was no longer there. He was behind him. Two did not use a weapon. He grabbed the wrist of Pike's gun hand and twisted. There was a sound like a dry stick snapping. Pike howled, a high, thin sound, and the gun clattered to the ground. To hit him once, a precise, calculated blow to the temple. Pike fell like a felled tree. Evelyn was already scrambling down the path. She ran to the children, her hands shaking, and sawed at their ropes with the small knife Two had given her. "It is all right," she said, her voice a strange, calm sound. "You are safe. We are here to take you home." Two was not finished. He went to Pike's saddle, which was slung over a rock. He tore open the saddlebag, and there, wrapped in an oily rag, was a small, heavy piece of iron. It was a brand, a simple, stark Roman numeral 13. It was still warm, and it smelled of burned wood and horsehair. He held it up as Evelyn led the children, coughing and crying, toward the entrance. "The proof," he said. "Two riders!" Evelyn screamed. A cloud of dust was pouring into the quarry entrance. It was the posse, and at its head, his face purple with rage, was Marshal Locke. "There he is!" Locke bellowed, his pistol drawn. "There is the murdering renegade. Take him. He has got the children." The posse, a mix of drunken miners and terrified settlers, fanned out, their rifles raising. "No!" Evelyn screamed, pushing the children behind her. "You are wrong. He saved them." "He is a liar," Locke roared. "He has charmed you. Girl, shoot him." "Stand down." The voice was not a shout. It was a physical force. It cut through the yelling, the dust, and the confusion. Sheriff Dawson, flanked by his two deputies, rode into the quarry from the same entrance, his horse pushing Locke's horse aside. "This is a county matter, Marshal," Dawson said, his voice lethally quiet. He did not have his gun drawn, but his hand rested on the butt. "And you are standing in the middle of a crime scene. Who are these children?" "They are my children, mister." Langford pushed his way through the posse, his face a mess. He saw Sarah and Timmy, and he fell from his horse, running to them, pulling them into his arms. You saved them." He looked at Toe, his face a canvas of stunned, warring emotions. "He saved them," Evelyn said, her voice clear and carrying. "From them." She pointed to the bound and gagging Pike, who one of the deputies was now securing. "That," To said, stepping forward. He threw the brand. It landed in the dust at Sheriff Dawson's feet. "Is what he used to burn Langford's barn. It belongs to Barrett Kane." Sheriff Dawson looked at the brand. He looked at Pike. He looked at the rescued children. And then he looked at Marshal Locke. "Marshal, you are interfering with a kidnap investigation." "This is my town, my jurisdiction," Locke sputtered. "This is my county," Dawson replied. "And your jurisdiction just ended. Deputy, take his weapon." Locke's face went white. The posse, seeing the children safe with their father, lowered their rifles, their anger melting into a confused, sheepish silence. Sheriff Dawson looked at Toe and Evelyn. "I got your cousin's message, and I got the telegraph. It seems I got here just in time." "It is not over," Evelyn said, handing him the sealed affidavit from Elton Gray. "This is the proof. This is why they did it. We have to get to Maple Bend, to the judge." Dawson nodded, tucking the affidavit inside his coat. "You are right. This is not over. The rumors are still flying. The telegraph wire is buzzing with Indian uprisings. If we do not get to Judge Hadley before that courthouse opens, this entire valley will be at war by noon." He turned his horse. "We all ride. Now, Langford, get your children home, the rest of you," he said to the posse. "Go home and sleep it off. The law is handling this." He looked at Toe and Evelyn. "We ride for Maple Bend. We take the high pass." The journey was a blur of exhaustion. They rode through the dark, pushing the horses. As they climbed into the high country, the air turned bitter cold, and a sudden, vicious squall of snow and ice hit them. It was the land's final, indifferent test. They rode through Crooked Pass, a narrow, treacherous trail with a 1,000-foot drop, their horses slipping, the wind screaming. Evelyn did not falter. She rode like she had been born to it, her face set, her eyes on Toe's back. As they finally came down from the pass, the sky was gray with the promise of morning. Below them, the lights of Maple Bend were small, warm pinpricks of yellow. Evelyn pulled up alongside too. She looked at him, the man who had pulled her from the river, the man who had shared his grief, the man who had just walked into an ambush to save 2 children he did not know. "You said in the cabin you would protect me," she said, her voice rough. "I keep my word," he said, not looking at her, his eyes on the town. "You did not just protect me," she said. "You saved a town. You stopped a war." To looked out over the valley, his valley, the land his people had walked for 1,000 years, the land that held the bones of his wife and his son. He looked at the lights of the town that wanted him dead. "I am not fighting for the land," he said, his voice so quiet she had to lean in to hear it. "The land does not need my weak anger. I am fighting so the land will still have water for everyone." He nudged his pony forward. "Come, let us go see your judge." Maple Bend was a town of brick and 2-story buildings, a place that believed in its own permanence. It had a main street wide enough for 4 wagons abreast, a bank with a stone facade, and a courthouse with a small, painted dome. It was just after 6 in the morning, the sun a weak, gray promise, when Sheriff Dawson led his small, exhausted party down that street. They did not go to the courthouse. They did not go to the jail. Sheriff Dawson led them directly to a neat, white clapboard house on the edge of town, one with a picket fence and a sleeping garden. He dismounted, walked past the gate, and pounded on the front door with his fist. A light appeared in an upstairs window, followed by a muffled, grumpy voice. A minute later, the door was pulled open by a man in a long, flannel nightshirt. He was tall, thin as a rail, with a shock of white hair and a face like a dried apple. This was Judge Cyrus Hadley. "Dawson," the judge grumbled, squinting in the dim light. "What in God's name is the meaning of this? It is not yet 7 o'clock." "Apologies, Your Honor," Dawson said, his voice carrying no apology at all. "The county is on fire, and Marshal Locke is holding the match. We have a conspiracy, a kidnapping, and an attempted murder, and these 2, he gestured to Toe and Evelyn, who stood on the walkway, are the only things that stopped a full-blown war." Judge Hadley's sleepy expression vanished. His eyes, a pale, piercing blue, snapped wide awake. He looked at Toe, standing tall in his buckskin. He looked at Evelyn, in her borrowed dine clothes, her face pale with exhaustion but her chin high. He looked at the exhaustion on Dawson's face. "Give me 5 minutes," the judge said, and shut the door. True to his word, he emerged 5 minutes later, fully dressed in a black suit, carrying his gavel. "We will open the court," he said, his voice a dry rasp. "We will do this now. We will put the truth on the record before the lies have time to travel." The courtroom was cold, smelling of floor wax and old paper. At first, it was just them, the judge at his high bench, Dawson, Two, and Evelyn on a front pew, and the 2 deputies guarding the prisoners, Pike and Breaker, who were chained in a jury box. But as the judge sent a deputy to fetch the clerk, the word began to spread. A lawyer, a slick, well-dressed man from back east, appeared as if from nowhere. He introduced himself as Mr. Sloan, representing the New Century Mining Corporation, and, he added, the interests of Mr. Barrett Kane. Barrett Kane himself arrived moments later. He was not the roughneck his men were. He wore a clean suit, a silk tie, and a hat he politely removed. He looked like a banker, his face smooth, his eyes holding a calm, almost pleasant, amusement. He nodded to the judge, smiled at his lawyer, and took a seat, as if he were a spectator at a play. The townspeople began to trickle in, drawn by the rumor. The miners, smelling of stale whiskey and suspicion, took the benches on Kane's side. The ranchers and storekeepers, their faces grim, filled in the other. Marshal Locke slipped in through a side door, his face pale and sweating. He stood in the back, trying to look invisible. "This court is in emergency session," Judge Hadley declared, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "Sheriff Dawson, you asked for this. Begin." "Your Honor," Sloan, Kane's lawyer said, rising smoothly. "Before we begin this irregular proceeding, I must insist on a point of law. A warrant, signed and filed by Marshal Locke, is outstanding for one Evelyn Hart. She is charged with theft. She is a fugitive. We demand she be taken into custody immediately." "Demand?" Judge Hadley looked at him over his spectacles. "You demand, Mr. Sloan. In my court, you will find I am the only one who makes demands here. Your objection is noted. It is also, for the moment, overruled. Sit down." Sloan sat, his smile tightening. "Sheriff," the judge said, "proceed." Sheriff Dawson told it all. He was a plain speaker, and he laid the facts out like bricks. Dawson Begay's warning, the burned barn, the 13 brand, the false telegraph, the 2 children held hostage in the quarry, the capture of Pike and Breaker. He placed the brand and Pike's pistol on the evidence table. "And finally," Dawson said, "I submit this, an affidavit from Elton Gray, the territorial surveyor, regarding the documents this woman, Evelyn Hart, was protecting." Sloan was on his feet again. "Objection hearsay. We have no chance to cross-examine this affidavit. It is inadmissible." "Mr. Sloan," Judge Hadley said, his patience a thin, cracking sheet of ice. "If the contents of that paper are what Sheriff Dawson suggests, this is not a simple matter of theft. It is a matter of imminent public peril. I am admitting it. Your exception is noted. Sheriff, read the relevant passages." Dawson read. He read Elton Gray's expert opinion that the aquifer system was a closed loop, that it was the only source of water for the entire region, and that the proposed mining techniques would, without question, poison it, rendering the valley uninhabitable within 5 years. A deep, angry rumble went through the side of the courtroom where the ranchers sat. This was not about an Indian or a runaway girl. This was about their wells, their cattle, their lives. A convenient and dramatic opinion, Sloane said coolly. "From a man who is not here. What we do have is a contract." He produced a document with a flourish. A legal, binding agreement for the transfer of mineral rights on the Hart property, signed by its legal owner, Robert Hart. The only thing standing in the way is this girl, who, in a fit of emotion, stole her father's papers and ran. "Call Evelyn Hart," the judge said. Evelyn felt Toe's presence beside her. He did not look at her, but she could feel the stillness from him. "Be the rock," he had told her. She stood, walked to the stand, and was sworn in. Her voice was a small, trembling whisper. "Miss Hart," Sloane began, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Is it not true you had a disagreement with your father?" "Yes," Evelyn said. "And is it not true you stole these private documents from his desk?" I took them to stop him." "To stop him from what child?" Sloane said, turning to the courtroom. "From securing his family's financial future. To stop him from selling me." Evelyn said. The courtroom, which had been murmuring, went dead silent. "I beg your pardon," Sloane said, his smile faltering. Evelyn turned from him and looked at Judge Hadley. Her voice, when she spoke again, was no longer a whisper. It was clear, cold, and steady. "That document is not just for mineral rights, Your Honor. It is a marriage contract. It was an agreement by my father, Robert Hart and Barrett Kane, to marry me to one of Mr. Kane's associates, a man I have never met, in exchange for my share of the land." The judge leaned forward. "Is this true, Miss Hart?" "It is," Evelyn said. "My father signed it. Marshal Locke." She pointed to the back of the room, where the marshal flinched. "Signed it as a witness. But I did not. I refused. My father told me they would force me. So I ran. I ran to stop them from completing the fraud." "Fraud," Sloane scoffed. "A father's arrangement is not fraud." "It is," Evelyn said, her voice ringing with a desperate, newfound strength. "When the contract itself states it is void. Read the last clause. Mr. Sloane, read it to the court." Sloane's eyes scanned the paper, his face tightening. "I will read it," Evelyn said. "It says the contract is in full effect upon the completion of the marriage ceremony and the signature of all parties. I am a party. This is my signature." She held up her right hand, showing it was empty. "I never signed. I never consented. They tried to run me off the road and kill me to get this paper back, because this paper proves their entire claim is a lie." The courtroom exploded. The miners were confused, but the ranchers and townspeople were outraged. This was not law. This was something dark and ugly. Judge Hadley slammed his gavel. "Silence, silence in this court." He looked at Evelyn, and his gaze was hard. But it was not unkind. "You have made a very serious allegation, young lady, and I have the proof." Sheriff Dawson said. He called Mr. Langford, who walked to the stand, his face pale, and told the court how Pike had taken his children. He pointed at the brand. "That's the mark they left on my barn," he said. "It is all circumstantial," Sloane shouted, his composure finally breaking. "A collection of lies from a renegade Indian, a hysterical girl, and a senile surveyor. We have a signed contract. We demand the law be upheld. We demand the warrant for this thief be served." "Your Honor," Tunat Ani said. His voice was not loud. It was quiet, deep, and it cut through the noise like a cold, clean blade. Every head in the courtroom turned. Judge Hadley stared at him. "Mr. Natani, I do not believe you have been called." "I was called," Tu said, rising to his full height. He did not walk to the stand. He stood in the aisle, a figure of stone and buckskin in a room of wool and paper. "I was called by a woman's scream in the river. I was called by the cries of 2 children in a quarry. And I am called now." He turned. not to the judge, but to the people. I am to not ani, I am dine, this. He gestured to the walls. Is your world. This is your law. It is a law of paper. Your paper. He pointed at Sloane. Says a man can sign away his daughter. It says a man can own a woman. It says a man can take land by drawing a line on a map. He turned to the judge. This paper, he touched the affidavit from Elton Gray, speaks of the truth. It speaks of the water. My people have lived on this land for 1,000 years. We know the water. We know it is one. You poison it in the creek. You poison it in the well. You poison it for the Bilagana rancher. You poison it for the dying child. His gaze swept the room, and for the first time, his voice rose, not in anger, but with a deep, resonant power. You have lost the balance. Hose-ho. Your world is not in harmony. You have a man. He pointed directly at Barrett Kane, who looked back, his face a mask of iron. Who will poison the water for all your children, just for a yellow rock? You have a lawman. He pointed at Marshall Locke. Who will help him? And you have a contract that calls this legal. He fell silent. The courtroom was so quiet. The sound of a boot scraping the floor in the back row was like a gunshot. I have saved the children, Te said, his voice dropping back to a quiet intensity. I have brought the woman who speaks the truth. The rest is for you. You must choose your paper law or the water, your lies or the truth. I am finished. He turned, walked back to his bench, and sat down. Judge Hadley looked at the contract. He looked at the brand. He looked at Pike, who was staring at the floor. He looked at Barrett Kane, who was calmly lighting a cigarillo until a deputy barked at him to put it out. The judge's face was like carved granite. This court, he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble, is not a tool for thieves, and it is not a place of murder. He slammed his gavel. 1. I am issuing a temporary injunction on any and all mining activities by the New Century Mining Corporation related to the Miller Creek property, pending a full territorial review. A roar of approval went up from the ranchers, a hiss of fury from the miners. Kane's lawyer was on his feet, shouting. 2, the judge yelled over him. I am voiding the warrant for Evelyn Hart. She is not a fugitive. She is a material witness to a conspiracy to commit fraud and attempted murder. She is placed in the protective custody of Sheriff Dawson. Mr. Sloane, you will file your client's civil claim at that time, and I promise you, it will be a public and most thorough hearing. 3, the judge's voice cracked like a whip. I am ordering Pike and Breaker held without bail on charges of kidnapping, arson and attempted murder, and... He paused, looking at the back of the courtroom. Marshall Locke, given the testimony, you are hereby suspended, pending a full investigation by the United States Marshal Service. Surrender your badge and weapon to Sheriff Dawson. Marshall Locke looked, for a moment, like he would run, but the deputies were already moving. He unpinned his badge, his hand shaking, and let it clatter to the floor. He looked at Toe, and his face was a mask of pure, unadulterated poison. This is not over, Injun, he hissed, just loud enough for Toe to hear as the deputies took him by the arms. This hearing is adjourned. Judge Hadley slammed his gavel, and the courtroom erupted. It was a storm. The crowd surged, miners yelling at ranchers, people shouting at the deputies. Kane and his lawyer were in a furious, whispered conference. In the chaos, Two and Evelyn slipped out the side door. Led by Sheriff Dawson, they stood on the courthouse steps in the full, bright, morning sun. They were exhausted, swaying on their feet, their ears ringing. The town was a swirl of angry, confused, and relieved voices. It was not a victory, it was a ceasefire. It was a pause. Evelyn looked at the man beside her. He was watching the crowd, his face unreadable, his body still tense, ready for the next threat. Her hand was trembling. She had her life, but it was not her own. She was a witness, property of the court, her future still tied to paper. But at least this paper was just... She reached out, her fingers barely grazing the back of his hand. It was a small, hesitant gesture. His skin was warm, solid as the rock he had told her to be. He did not pull away. He did not react at all, but she felt the small, tensing tremor that ran through him. "It is not over," she whispered, her voice rough with fatigue. Toe's gaze did not leave the crowd. He watched Barrett Kane emerge from the courthouse, put his hat on, and walk calmly down the street, as if he were on his way to lunch. "No," To said, his voice a low breath. "It is not." The injunction was a bandage, not a cure. Maple Bend was a town holding its breath, waiting to see if the wound would fester. Judge Hadley's ruling had frozen the conflict, but Barrett Kane was still a free man. Evelyn Hart, now a ward of the county and its star witness, was moved to a room behind the general store. It was deemed safer than the hotel, with a back entrance and thick stone walls. Sheriff Dawson had posted a deputy at the front, and one at the back alley, where the coal chute and loading dock were. Tunat Ani stood across the street, in the shadows of a livery. He had refused to leave. Sheriff Dawson had offered him a bed in the jailhouse for his own protection. "A cell is a cell, Sheriff." Tu had said, "I will be outside." He watched. He did not trust the deputies. He did not trust the brick buildings. He knew Kane. A man like that did not lose. He simply changed the game. The afternoon bled into a cold, windy evening. The sky was a bruised purple. Sheriff Dawson and Mr. Langford were in the sheriff's office, taking the long, formal statement that would be telegraphed to the territorial capital. The town was quiet. Too quiet. Evelyn sat on the small cot, the notebook her copy, as the original was now locked in the judge's safe in her lap. She was writing, she was documenting everything she could remember, her hand flying across the page. She was so focused, she did not hear the first soft scrape at the back door. The deputy in the alley was gone. A coin, a promise of whiskey, had been enough to make him walk to the saloon for just 1 minute. The door opened. Barrett Kane stepped in. He was not Pike. He was not a brute. He was immaculate. His suit was clean. His hair was combed. He held a small, pearl-handled revolver in his hand, and he held it as if it were a teacup. Evelyn's head snapped up, her eyes wide, a scream forming in her throat. "I would not," Kane said, his voice a soft, reasonable parlor-room tone. "I have a man watching your Indian. He is in the livery, a single, loud sound from this room, and he will be shot. We are going to walk out. Miss Hart, you will come with me." "The deputies," she whispered, "are incompetent," Kane finished, "as is the entire legal system." He gestured with the pistol. "My career has been built on the incompetence of small men. Now, please, stand up. We are going to the old quarry north of town. It is time, as they say, to cut our losses." Tu felt it before he saw it. The shift in the air, the wrongness. The man who was supposed to be watching the alley was gone. He moved from the shadows, his moccasins silent on the boardwalk. He was too late. He found the back door ajar. The deputy was just rounding the corner, wiping his mouth. Tu shoved him aside without a word and burst into the room. It was empty. A small, square piece of paper was pinned to the wall with a knife. Tu's knife, the one he had given Evelyn. The note was in Kane's elegant script. "Mr. Not Ani, bring the original notebook, not the copy, and the affidavit. Come alone to the abandoned steam quarry. If I see deputies, if I see the sheriff, she will die. You have until midnight." He had taken the bait. He had taken her bait. The knife was the message. She had not gone quietly. She had given him the clue. She had left his knife, knowing he would know she was marking the trail. Tu did not go for the notebook. He went to the sheriff's office. He kicked the door open. Dawson and Langford jumped to their feet. "He has her," said, his voice a low, vibrating growl of fury. "He has Evelyn, the old steam quarry." Dawson grabbed his rifle. "We ride. I will get my deputies. We will surround the place." "No," said, stopping him with a hand on his chest. "That is what he wants. He is a spider. He wants you to move, to show yourself. He will kill her the second he hears a horse. This is not a fight. This is a trade and a trap." "Then what?" Dawson said, his face grim. "We use his pride," said. "He thinks he has won. He will want to talk. He will want to boast. You." He looked at Dawson. "And you." He looked at Langford. "Will come with me, but you will not be seen. You will be my ears. You will be my witnesses. When he boasts, you will be the recording. You will be the law he cannot see." "That is a hell of a risk, too," Dawson said. "He is a man of paper," said. "He trusts nothing he does not see. He will not see you. We must go. Now." The abandoned steam quarry was a dead, hollowed-out bowl on the edge of the desert. The wind was a constant, screaming presence, filling the air with dust and grit. A few rotting wooden structures still stood, including a massive, algae-stained wooden water cistern perched high on the cliff, used, decades ago, to power the steam drills. Barrett Kane stood near the center, the glow of a single lantern illuminating his calm face. He held Evelyn in front of him, one arm around her waist, the small revolver pressed to her temple. She was tied, her hands bound in front of her. "You are late, mister, not Ani," Kane called out as Toe walked into the circle of light, his hands empty. The wind was slow, said, stopping 20 yards away. "The papers," Kane said. "Do not play games. I am not Pike. I will not hesitate." Two reached inside his shirt and pulled out the small, leather-bound notebook and Elton Gray's affidavit. He held them up. "Let her go. They are paper. They mean nothing to me." "They mean everything to me," Kane said, his voice tight. "They are my reputation, my future. The New Century Mining Corporation does not tolerate injunctions, and they do not forgive failure." "So you kill a woman for your job?" said, his voice flat. "I do what is necessary." Kane said, "This is a world of profit, mister, not Ani, not prophecy. Your Hozo is a child's bedtime story. This," he tapped the revolver, "is the truth. Now, the papers." "You admit it, then," said, his voice rising just enough to carry on the wind. "You admit it all. The fraud, the murder of the carriage driver, the kidnapping of the Langford children." "Of course." Kane laughed, a dry, sharp sound. "It was business. Robert Hart was a fool, willing to sell his own child. Marshall Locke was a coward, willing to sell his badge for $200 a month. And you are just a sentimental savage. You have lost." High above, hidden in the rocks, Sheriff Dawson and Mr. Langford looked at each other. They had heard it, every word. "Now," Kane said, "throw them, slowly." To toss the notebook and the affidavit onto the ground, halfway between them. "Your turn." Kane smiled. "No, I think not." He pushed Evelyn away from him, shoving her hard toward the ground. "She is the last witness. You are the last obstacle." He raised the revolver, aiming not at Evelyn, but at two. He had been waiting for this, had seen it from the moment he arrived. The cistern, high on the cliff, leaking, the wood rotted. It was fed by the small stream from the map, the very lifeblood of the valley. And on its side, the old, rusted iron release lever. As Kane raised the gun, moved. He was not moving toward Kane. He was moving to the side. He had a length of rope in his hand. He uncoiled it, and in one smooth, powerful motion, he threw it. It was not a lasso. It was a weight. The end, a heavy knot, flew up and wrapped itself around the rusted lever. Two pulled. The lever snapped, The front wall of the ancient cistern, its wood turned to paper by 1,000 nights of wind and frost, did not just open, it disintegrated. It was not a flood, it was an explosion of water. Thousands of gallons of freezing, slimy water and mud hit the quarry floor with the sound of a cannon. It did not strike Cain. It struck the ground in front of him, creating a wall of spray, mud, and mist. Cain, blinded, fired his gun. The shot went wide. The wind and the water spray created a sudden, blinding, choking fog. The quarry floor, a moment before dry dust, was now a foot of slick, grasping mud. Evelyn, on the ground, had not been idle. While Cain was monologuing, she had been working on the ropes. The blade of the knife he had pinned the note with was in her boot, where to had seen her place it. In the chaos, she cut the last strand. Cain was sputtering, trying to wipe the mud and grit from his eyes, his fine suit ruined. He saw her. "You!" he roared, and lunged for her. He was fast, but two was faster. He came out of the mist like a spirit, tackling Cain at the waist. They went down, a crash of bodies into the thick, cold mud. It was not a fight, it was a desperate animal struggle. Cain was strong, fueled by a pure corporate rage. He broke free, his hands scrambling in the mud, finding his revolver. Evelyn saw it. She did not run. She stood up. She became the rock. She picked up a heavy, jagged piece of stone. "Mr. Cain!" she yelled. He turned, the revolver coming up, mud dripping from the barrel. He saw her. To hit him from behind, they went down again. The revolver flew from Cain's hand, landing in the mud. They rolled, slipping, choking. Cain's fingers found Toe's throat. Evelyn scrambled, her hands finding the revolver. She picked it up. Toe was fading, his vision blurring, Cain's thumbs digging into his windpipe. "Get off him!" Evelyn's voice. She stood over them, mud-caked, her hair a wild mat, holding the revolver in both hands. The barrel was shaking, but it was pointed directly at Cain's head. Cain froze. He looked up at her. He saw not a frightened girl from the east. He saw a survivor. He saw the end. That hesitation was all Toe needed. He used Cain's frozen posture, reversed his grip, and brought his own weight down, slamming the back of Cain's head into the hard rock hidden just beneath the mud. Cain went limp. Toe pushed him off, gasping, climbing to his knees. He looked at Evelyn. She was still holding the gun, tears streaming down her face, cutting clean paths through the mud. He did not go to her. He crawled to Cain. He felt for a pulse. It was strong. The man was just unconscious. He took the rope Evelyn had cut and, his hands quick and efficient, he bound Barrett Cain, ankle to wrist. Sheriff Dawson and Mr. Langford slid down the embankment, their rifles at the ready. They stopped, looking at the scene. The bound, muddy, unconscious villain. The warrior on his knees, gasping for air. The woman, covered in filth, holding the gun. "He said it," Langford said, his voice awed. "He admitted it all. I heard it." "I heard it too," Dawson said. He looked at Toe. "I will not forget this. None of us will." Toe found Cain's leather satchel. He handed it to the sheriff. Inside was not just paper money, but a small, neat ledger. Dawson opened it. His face went pale. "My God," he whispered. "It is all here. Payments to R.L. That is Locke. Coded telegraphs from the New Century Board. They authorized all necessary measures." They knew. They knew all of it. They rode back to Maple Bend, not in triumph, but in a state of grim exhaustion, dragging a now awake, silent, and muddy Barrett Cain on the end of a rope. For the third time, they went to Judge Hadley's house. This time, the sun was rising. The judge met them on the porch, a cup of coffee in his hand. Sheriff Dawson dropped the ledger and Cain's revolver on the porch steps. "A full confession, Your Honor, witnessed by myself and Mr. Langford." He admitted to the conspiracy, the fraud, and the attempted murders, and this ledger links it all, from martial lockup to the New Century Board of Directors. Judge Hadley looked at the evidence. He looked at the bound prisoner. He took a long, slow sip of his coffee. Then he went inside. He came back out with a stack of papers and a pen. He sat on his porch swing and began to write. He signed his name with a flourish and handed the papers to Dawson. "That," he said, "is a warrant for the arrest of Barrett Kane on 17 counts. And that," he handed him another, "is a warrant for the arrest of Marshal Robert Locke for conspiracy and corruption. And this," he handed over the last, "is a summons for the entire board of the New Century Mining Corporation. It seems they have a great deal to explain to the United States government." The town was waking up. They watched as Sheriff Dawson walked to the jail. They watched as he took the suspended badge from his pocket, walked into the cell block, and formally arrested Marshal Locke, a man who had already been stripped of his pride. They watched as the muddy, defeated, and very rich Mr. Kane was thrown into the cell beside him. The town saw the paper law, the thing that had seemed so weak, finally close its fist. It was not the fast, hot justice of a mob. It was the slow, cold, and final justice of a community that had finally, and painfully, chosen order over chaos. The arrest of Kane and Locke did not bring quiet to the valley. It brought a different kind of noise, the sound of a structure, rotten for years, finally collapsing in on itself. The telegraph wires hummed, carrying the news to the territorial capital, and from there, back east, to the men on the board of the New Century Mining Corporation, who were suddenly, and for the first time, very interested in the specifics of their Western operations. In Maple Bend, the jail was full and the courtroom was busy, but the real work was happening in the street, in the general store, and in the hearts of the people who had to live there. 2 days after the arrests, a town meeting was called. It was not held in the courthouse, but in the large, unfinished livery stable, the only place big enough. The air was cold and smelled of hay and nervous sweat. The settlers, the ranchers, and the storekeepers gathered, but this time, they were not alone. At the back, standing by the open doors, was a delegation. Tunata Ani was there, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. Beside him stood Dawson Bigay, and with them, the elder, Shidi Yazi, wrapped in a blanket, her eyes missing nothing. The meeting was loud and angry at first. Men shouted about their land values, about the mine, about the loss of jobs. Then, Mr. Langford stood up. He was not the broken, terrified man from the wagon. He was quiet, his hands clasped in front of him. "I have something to say," he said, his voice carrying in the sudden silence. He turned to the back of the barn, to the Dine delegation. He walked, his boots heavy on the packed earth, until he stood 5 feet from Mr. Natani, Langford said, his voice thick. I called you a savage. I aimed a gun at you. I did this while you were on your way to save my children. I listened to the lies because it was easier than listening to the truth." He looked at the crowd. "We have been living on fear. We have been living on hate. And it cost me my barn. And it almost cost me my son and my daughter. The man who burned that barn was white. The man who lied to us was white. The man who saved my children was Dine." He turned back to Tu. "I cannot, there are not words, but I am asking for your forgiveness, the forgiveness of your people. We were wrong." Shidi Yazi said something, a few sharp, quiet words in her own language. Dawson Bigay translated, "Our grandmother says forgiveness is not a word. It is a bridge. You must build it, not just talk about it." Langford nodded, his eyes wet. "Then let us build it. That map, that water, it belongs to all of us. I propose we use the town funds, my own funds, to dig a public well at the place Elton Gray marked, a well for the town and a well for the Dine. And I propose we form a council, a water council, with 3 of us and 3 of you, to make the laws, to protect it, together. A few of the old miners grumbled, but the ranchers, the men who lived by the water, nodded. It was a start. It was the first plank in the bridge. Evelyn Hart sat in the small room Sheriff Dawson had secured for her. She was no longer a ward of the court, but a witness. She was free. A stack of mail had arrived on the morning stage, forwarded from her father's home. It was mostly old letters, but one was new. The handwriting was her father's. She had stared at it for an hour before opening it. It was, she expected, a demand for her return, a threat, a disowning. It was none of those things, and it was all of them. My dearest Evelyn, I am informed by telegraph that you are safe, which is a mercy I do not deserve. I am also informed that our business partners, Mr. Kane and his associates, are in federal custody. The name of Robert Hart is now mud in every bank from here to Philadelphia. My partners are ruined, and I, it seems, am ruined with them. I write this not to garner your sympathy, child, but to offer my confession. I was a fool. I was a proud, greedy fool. I saw a number in a ledger. I did not see the poison. I did not see the violence. And I did not see my own daughter. I believed I was strong, and in my strength, I became a monster. I signed that paper. It was my hand. My sin. I cannot ask you to come home. There is, for the moment, no home to come to. The banks are seizing the house. I only pray that you, in your new life, can find the peace that I so willingly traded for a lie. Your father, Robert Hart. She read the letter twice. There was no apology, not in the way she wanted, but there was the truth. He had, at last, taken responsibility. He had signed his own name to his own failure. She folded the letter. She felt a profound, deep sadness, but she did not feel the need to go back. That life was over. The paper chains were broken. She was, for the first time, truly, terribly, and wonderfully, on her own, on the reservation, in the great, round hogan of the elders. Tunat Ani spoke. He and Dawson Bigay laid out the plan for the Water Council. The Bilagana are afraid. To said to the elders, his own language flowing, smooth and respectful. But they are not all fools. Langford is a man who has learned from his pain. They are willing to share. They are willing to learn. The young warrior who had been so angry before, the one who had spit on the ground, spoke up. Learn what will they teach us? Ashki, how to sign paper that steals how to burn barns. No, to said, his voice quiet, cutting. We will teach them. We will teach them how to listen to the water. We will teach them how to live with the land, not on top of it. And they will teach us their law, their paper. We must learn the paper, or we will always be slaves to it. We must learn their words, so we can hold them to the promises they make. Shidi Yazi, who had been listening, her eyes closed, finally spoke. The white man's law is a fast river, she said, her voice a dry, reedy sound. It cuts new banks, it floods, it changes. Our law is the stone. It does not change, but a stone can be worn down by a fast river. She opened her eyes, and they were sharp. You are right. We must build a dam. We must learn to mix the stone and the water. We will sit on this council. We will learn the paper, and we will not be moved. In Maple Bend, Sheriff Dawson pinned a new badge to Dawson Bigay's chest. It was a silver star, just like his own. Deputy Dawson, the sheriff said, a rare, small smile on his face. You will be my liaison to the din. You will be part of the new territorial watch. This violence, the mining companies. It will not end with Kane. We are building an early warning system. I need your ears, and I need your horse. Dawson Bigay looked at the badge. I will be my own man, sheriff, not yours, and not my uncle's. I am not asking you to be, Dawson said. I am asking you to be the bridge, the one you have always been. The final piece fell into place a week later. Judge Hadley called Evelyn to his chambers. He had a stack of papers on his desk. Miss Hart, he said, his voice formal. The Territorial Court, on my recommendation, has reviewed your case. The contract of marriage between yourself and Mr. Kane's associate, witnessed by Robert Locke, has been found to be coercive, fraudulent, and in violation of public decency. It is formally and permanently voided. He pushed a paper toward her. Your land, he said. The parcel from your mother is yours, free and clear. He then pushed the original, brittle, hated contract across the desk toward her. And this, he said, is now just a piece of paper. It has no power. You may do with it as you wish. Evelyn picked it up. She looked at the signatures, her father's, Marshal Locke's. She walked to the small wood stove in the corner of the judge's office, opened the iron door, and dropped it in. She watched until the edges curled, turned brown, and vanished into a wisp of black ash. That night, there was a celebration. Not in the town, but in the canyon. At the Hogan of Shidi Yazi, it was a meal of thanks. The air was thick with the smells of mutton stew, blue corn cakes, and sharp, sweet sage tea. Evelyn was there. So was Toe. Sheriff Dawson had come, and so had Mr. Langford, and his 2 children, who sat shyly, watching the dying children play a game with stones. It was a strange, impossible gathering. The chosen family, the survivors of the storm. Shidi Yazi stood. She was small, but her presence filled the Hogan. She spoke, and Dawson Bigay translated, his voice soft. Tonight, we eat, she said. We eat to remember that the earth gives, the water gives. We eat to remind ourselves that we are alive. We were broken. This valley was broken. Now, we are mending. She looked at Toe, and her gaze was full of a deep, old pride. My nephew has walked a hard path. He has walked in the ugly world to protect the beautiful. He has brought Hozo back to the water. Then she looked at Evelyn. And this one, she said. The woman who ran. She did not run from fear. She ran for truth. She is no longer Bilagana. She is no longer Dine. She is one of us, a person of the water. We are all, now, people of the water. Eat. They ate, and for a few hours. There was no past and no future. There was only the warmth of the fire, the taste of the food, and the sound of quiet, grateful laughter. Later, they stood outside. The night was vast. The stars so close they looked like embers from a great cosmic fire. The wind was gentle, carrying the scent of pine. Two stood beside Evelyn. A few feet away, they were silent for a long time. I am not going back, she said, her voice quiet. To the east. There is nothing for me there. I know, he said. Mr. Langford. He offered me a job, teaching his children, teaching at the new school. By the well, he said the Dine children could come, too. It is a good school. Said. They were silent again. The space between them was full of things unsaid. The terror in the cabin, the hand-in-hand promise, the fight in the mud. You are safe now, Evelyn Hart, he said. It sounded like a farewell. Am I? She asked, turning to him. Kane is in jail, but the New Century Mining Corporation is not. The world my father lived in is still out there. I will never be truly safe. He looked at her, and his face, in the starlight, was no longer a mask. It was just a man who had lost, and a man who had, against all odds, begun to heal. He reached into the pouch at his belt. He pulled out a small, exquisitely woven bag. It was the size of her thumb, made of dark red and black wool, with a design like a thunderbolt. It was on a thin, strong, leather cord. "This is not," he said, "like your paper. It is not a contract. It is not a promise of safety." He held it out. His hand, she saw, was not perfectly steady. "This is a medicine bag, a jish. My wife, she wove this for our son, to hold his spirit, to keep him in balance. It holds pollen from the high mountain. It holds a piece of turquoise for the sky, and a piece of jet for the earth. It is a prayer for Hosho." Evelyn looked at it, her heart stopping. I cannot, this belongs to your past, to your son." "He is gone," Tu said, his voice rough, but not broken. "The past is gone. The bag is empty if it is not used. A prayer is silent if it is not spoken. A life is empty if it is not shared." He held it out. "It is a sign that you are dying, not of the blood, but of the heart, one of the people. It is a sign that you have a place to stand." She reached out, her fingers trembling, and took it from him. She did not know what to say. "Thank you" was a small, useless word. She lifted the cord and slipped it over her head. The small bag fell, warm from his hand, and rested against her skin. Beneath the collar of her shirt, it felt like an anchor. It felt like a promise. He nodded. Once, a finality, an acceptance. She looked up at the sky, at the river of stars, and as she watched, a single, bright star fell. It drew a long, silver scratch across the dark, a line of light, before it was gone. The river, far below, was a quiet, silver ribbon in the darkness. It was no longer a raging monster. It was just the water, flowing, steady, to the sea. The medicine bag, small and warm against her skin, was a weight she had not known she needed. In the starlight, Evelyn Hart looked at Tanat Ani, at this man of rock and wind, and she saw not a savior, but a partner. The silence between them was no longer a space of things unsaid, but a space of things understood. "I choose this," she said, her voice quiet, but as steady as the stone beneath their feet. "I choose the water and the work. I choose this valley." He looked at her, and his eyes, which had held 1,000 yards of grief for 10 long years, were finally present. He saw her, the woman from the East, the woman of paper and books, who had been forged into something new by the river and the rock. "The work will be hard," he said, his own voice not quite steady. "The paper law is not finished. The men from the East will send more men like Cain. Then we will teach them," she said, her hand closing over the small bag at her neck. "We will be the bridge, you and I." He nodded, a slow, final movement. "We choose each other," he said, the words a pledge, an answer to the promise she had made on the starlit ridge. "And we choose the community. They are the same thing now." The future did not arrive all at once. It arrived in small, hard-won pieces, like crops from dry ground. The first piece was Langford, true to his word, put up half the money, and the town of Dry Willow, in a town meeting that was more about atonement than economics, voted to fund the rest. It was dug not with dynamite and brute force, but with a plan. Elton Gray, his eyes bright with a new purpose, mapped the digging, and Tu and his cousin, Dawson Begay, showed them where to sink the shaft without disturbing the main flow. A place the Dane had known for generations was stable. When the clean, cold water gushed up, it was a baptism. Beside the well, they built the school. It was just one room, made of sod and river stone, with 3 glass windows that had come all the way from Santa Fe. Evelyn Hart was its first and only teacher. Her students were a strange, hopeful mix. There was Sarah and Timmy Langford, their fear of the Dine replaced with a fierce, protective loyalty. There were 3 children from Dry Willow, whose parents, storekeepers, wanted them to get the learning that had passed them by. And Every other day, a small, shy group of 4 Dine children, including the son of the warrior who had once mistrusted her, would ride down from the high country. Evelyn taught them their letters, their numbers. She read to them from the books she had sent for, books about oceans they had never seen and cities they could not imagine. And, in return, they taught her the names of the plants that healed, and the names of the stars she had thought were just random lights. She was no longer just a teacher, she was a student. 2 was not there. Not at first. He was busy. The title of Scout no longer fit. He was a leader. He was on the new Water Council, sitting across a rough-hewn table from Langford and 2 other ranchers. He spoke quietly, with Dawson Begay translating, and he taught them about the land. He taught them that you cannot just take water, you must feed it. He organized the first river walk. It was a plan, based on his own knowledge and the lines of Evelyn's map. They planted 200 young cottonwood saplings along the scarred banks of the river, the places where the spring floods always did the most damage. They laid reinforcing stones, creating small, natural dams that would slow the water, not stop it, allowing the silt to settle and the land to heal itself. The ranchers, who had always seen the river as an enemy, a force to be broken, now saw it as a partner. They, too, were learning. He was also training a new kind of warrior. He took the young Dine men, the ones whose anger had almost boiled over into a war, and he taught them a new way to fight. He trained them in rescue. He taught them, as he had taught Evelyn, to read the river, to swim the currents, to pull life from the water, not just take it. He was building the first river rescue team the valley had ever known, a group that would, one day, save more settlers than all the old wars had killed. The long arm of the federal law, which so often moved only to punish, now moved to protect. A letter arrived for Judge Hadley, bearing the seal of the United States Territorial Council. The judge sent for Sheriff Dawson. "They have done it," Hadley said, his voice holding a note of rare surprise. He read from the letter, "The New Century Mining Corporation, following the testimony of Sheriff Dawson, and the evidence provided by all of you, is under full federal investigation." Dawson nodded, satisfied. Kane sang. So did Locke. They were happy to trade the men on the board for a lighter sentence. "It is more than that," Hadley said, tapping the paper. "They are citing your case, our case, as precedent in the matter of public trust and common resource. They are making new case law. Dawson, based on Elton Gray's affidavit and Tunat Ani's testimony, they are ruling that poisoning a common water source, even on private land, is a federal crime. They have used the word hozho." The judge looked baffled. "They have put a Dine word into the federal registry." The freedom that Evelyn had fought for was not just the absence of her father's chains. It was this, the ability to choose, every day, to do the right thing, even when it was hard. The ability to build, not just to run. The family she had found was not one of blood, but one of choice. It was the family of the storm. It was Langford, who now greeted 2 on the street as a brother. It was Sheriff Dawson, who spent his evenings learning Dine words from his new deputy. It was Shidi Yazi, who came to the school once a month and told the Bilagana children the stories of the stars, stories that were older than the town, older than the paper laws. The winter passed, the spring came, and the cottonwood saplings showed new, green life. The river, fed by the melt, rose, but it did not rage. The new stone banks held. The water was clear. Evelyn was riding back from the school, the day done, when she saw him. 2 was waiting for her on the ridge above his cabin. He was not the lone, grieving scout. He was just a man, waiting for the woman he loved. She dismounted, and they stood for a moment, not touching, just looking at the valley spread below them. It was a new valley, a healing valley. "The wind smells like rain," she said. "It does," he said. "From far away, but it is coming." He took her hand. It was the first time he had done so, not as a promise of protection, not as a warrior's pledge, but as a man. His hand was hard, warm, and it fit hers perfectly. They walked to his cabin. It was no longer his, it was theirs. He had mended the door. He had built a new, wider window to let in the southern light, and hanging in that window, turning slowly in the breeze, was the woven sash. It was the one Shidiyazi had worn to the great healing meal. It was a band of brilliant reds, blacks, and whites, the colors of the earth, the sky, and the water. It was a thread, a single, strong line, connecting the memory of his lost wife, the future of the woman beside him, and the promise of the children who were not yet born. It was not a paradise. It was not an end to trouble. Far to the east, men in boardrooms were already looking at new maps, at new ways to steal, at new papers to sign. The challenges would come. The wind would blow again. But for now, in this valley, the balance had returned. The air was clean, the water was safe, and the people, Dine and Bilagana alike, were, for the first time, walking in beauty. Thank you so much for listening to our story. We would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please share your city or country in the comments below. It is amazing to see where these tales travel. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to our channel, Wild West Tales, and giving this video a like. And if you really want to support us, please press that hype button. It helps us get these stories heard by so many more people. We will see you for the next tale.